Welcome to Ask an Artist. I hope there's somebody out there. This is the first, so I'm the guinea pig, and we'll see how it goes. I haven't done one of these before. Well, we have one person joined up. Maybe we'll actually get more. Yeah, this is the, I guess I should say it's the first Drawn and Plastered event like this, and so everybody's curious to see how it's going to work out. Hopefully I won't scare any young children or animals. Maybe I'll even be invited back. I will answer any questions about art that you have. I'm primarily known as a color artist, so I've done work from all the major publishers, and I work in Photoshop on my handy-dandy iMac. I've always worked on Macintosh stuff, so I do not know anything about any other platforms. Any questions? When did you first decide that you wanted to create your own comics as a career? I seem to remember trying to draw my first comics when I was like 5 years old, and well, maybe 6, and they were in the back of one of my scribblers for school, and I just showed them to my friends for everyone to read, and they got passed around like that. And when I first decided to go professional, I guess I was in high school, maybe grade 10, and I remember reading an article about Charles Schulz and what it was like for him to be a syndicated strip artist. And I thought it might be similar, the sort of similar thing to be doing comic books, whether it was Superman or the Avengers or whomever. And so I started drawing a lot of that stuff. And I had been noticing they used to have in comics back then pages devoted to how to ink, or little one-page things on how to make a comic book. So I went from there. I didn't know about specific paper. I had an idea, that it was India ink, but I didn't know anything about any brands. So I just bought what I had at the time and tried to draw. Tried to learn how to draw with a brush, which was had mixed results. And that's when I guess I was really, starting to work towards becoming professional. Any more questions? Nope, no questions. Can ask anything except my bank account number and password, stuff like that. Nope. I see that there's a few more people on there. Please, feel free to ask questions. Don't be shy. Say hello. Okay, someone who has had the biggest influence on your comics career, and how has that person changed your work? I had gone through some reversals of fortune in my freelance career, and I had been sending some stuff into Marvel, trying to get work there, and they were, positive and all that, but I wasn't getting any work. And I had been around to when Captain Canuck was being published out of Winnipeg. I'd been around to the studio there, and I'd been taking my portfolio in and getting a lot of criticism from the artists that were working there, and so a few years later, when I was in taking art school, working on my Bachelor of Fine Arts, I bumped into George Freeman downtown, and he was actually looking for an assistant at that time. So I did a tryout with him, and I worked as his assistant for a few years until I was able to get an agent. This is before the days of the internet, so it was really different to get into things. But George had a huge effect on all of my ideas of what professionalism were, and just how to get through a day when you've got a deadline looming over your head like a chunk of concrete. But before all of that, I had started to do work as a wildlife artist, and I also had kind of turned my back on comics. And so the person who got me looking back at being a comic artist again was Jim Steranko, when he had an exhibit at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and I went in and saw all the work there, and I met him, and he told me to bring my portfolio around, and he did a crit on what I was doing, well, and what I was sucking at. And he got me back working at comics again, so that when George was looking for somebody, I'd still been working on my craft, and so I was further along and was able to win out on the competition to become his assistant. So it was kind of between those two, but mostly George's influence because of working day to day in a studio, putting the work out. Questions, please. I'm hoping that all the people are interested in the field and maybe doing some work of your own, and it would be really nice to hear what you're working on, and ask me, if there was things that you needed to know to push your work further along. I'd be happy to help out. Describe your typical work routine. Well, once I've woken up, and I don't mean just gotten out of bed, usually takes a little while to get going, but then I'll come into the studio, and depending on the job that I've got, there's different stages of the work. And when I start on a page, I usually will, if a cover comes in, I would get the cover, I would send it off, because I work with people who flat the file. That means they put colors down in detail of the on the cover, whether it's a big group shot or what have you, and then I get those flats from them and I color correct them. So the first thing I would do is get the file from them, download it from the internet, and go through it and decide, okay, it's Green Arrow. I know what greens he is because there are specific greens, and flesh tone that is kind of a standard that I'll work with, and set that all up. And then I'll change the file into a file that I can paint. and I'll just start doing the painting in that. And when that's done, I set it up for separations and make a proof and send the proof off to the artist and the editor. And if I'm lucky, they both like what was done, and then I put the file onto their server so that they have it, and then I make up a nice little invoice or voucher, or depending on some of the companies, just doing the work is the voucher itself, and then on to the next job. If it's something like a book, I like to do it in stages where I can get as many pages as I have done, and do the all of the color correcting to all the pages, and then sit down and do all the painting. And then as I paint each page, I would send off each proof. And then when all the proofs are back in, I would do any of the notes that the people had, like make that darker or that brighter, or, oh, you missed that planet in the background. It's not a sun, or, stuff like that. And make all the changes, and then send them up and resend the proofs with the changes. Once it's okay, then I can place the files onto the publisher's servers, and then they can go. And when I'm doing that, that will, I might be doing that till 10, 11 o'clock at night, depending on the job, and taking breaks in between to eat and refill my teacup, or depending if it's really hot, throw some ice into my water and keep going. Please, more questions. What element of your work gives you the most personal satisfaction? Cashing the check. No. Let's see. I like when the comps come in and I can see the work printed and I can have it in my hands, and I can, yes, I do the thing that all of us book nerds do is open it up, and you can smell it. You can smell the fresh ink, because it's basically come off the press, being slapped into an envelope and sent off to me. So it's a big reward to get that and have the real comic there in your hands, and see how well it's printed. It's also interesting to see, like, I've seen the story and read it on screen, but then when I read the comic, that's really, I find that's really different. It's, I don't know, it's more real. Another question: what has been the most rewarding project in your professional career, and why? Oh, man. Well, I've been involved in a lot of things. I worked on the Sword of Azrael with Joe Quesada and Kevin Nolan, and we all won awards for that that year. It was like the best series, and I got best colorist and all that sort of fan favorite stuff. And then after that, because the book was so popular, we ended up being flown out to the what is it, QVC or the Home Shopping Network, something like that, where we were buried behind a stack of thousands of copies, and we signed them all, and that was a nice little adventure, even if our arms were numb after signing for the whole day. So that, and it's still a thing that people talk to me about, and I sign almost at every convention I go to. People will show up with piles of those books. So I think it's and it still looks great. So yeah, I guess that one is, but it's a real, I think it's neck and neck tie with the Ring of the Nibelung, which was an epic 14-issue thing that I did with Craig Russell, which was the adaptation of Wagner's opera. And that's just, I don't know, I still find times when I'm just picking it up and flipping through it because I've remembered something about it and that, and you know, there's a disconnect when I'm looking at it and thinking, man, I did all of that. I just got another question. Can you give a good tip about the first thing to do to improve your coloring skills as a newbie? The coloring wheel, which is, you know, maybe boring, and that is a really good thing to learn. You can, I still keep mine around, and every once in a while, especially working for Deadline, where I've got to turn the work out and I'm looking at a page rather than think for too long about it. I will pull out my color wheel, and sometimes just flipping it around, like there's the regular color stuff on the front, which is probably more about painting, but to look on the back and to see, just look at the colors and let them flood into my head, and look at the split complementaries, triads, and just look through them. And even if I look at that and go, no, that's wrong, sometimes that can really push me towards what's right. And the thing that I usually tell people about approaching the page to improve your color skills is that when you look at the page, you already have the foundation in your head, because you can look at that and you know when you're looking at that art that thing, whether it's a building or a person or an object, you know the color of that. And once you know the color of that, you can build a whole page around that. And you've got to relax enough so that your instincts push you through it, because when you're doing the color work, the biggest thing you can do to improve your skills is to work on working faster. So if you can step back so that you're not in between your creative ideas and the work, that's probably the most important thing that you can do. And it builds up a lot of confidence, because when you trust your instincts like that and you go ahead and do the work, and you see it coming together, it's a very strong reaffirmation of, you know, probably what you knew at the beginning. But when you're faced with the tyranny of the blank page, it's, you know, it can be a little daunting at first. So besides just the obvious things like, you know, knowing your craft and understanding how to use Photoshop and which brushes are available to give you looks on that, you really need to be able to just let your ideas flow so that you can just keep going along, and it'll keep you from wasting a lot of time and, you know, and kind of undercutting your confidence. I hope that answers your question. If not, then, you know, please be more specific, and I will too. Questions, more questions, please. Oh, can you tell us about what you're working on right now? I can tell you about some of it, depending on work that is happening right now. I have to sign NDAs, which are non-disclosure agreements. I just did a couple of parts of a large book for DC Comics that'll be coming out this month. and I worked on a cover of I guess a special issue for October, and I got to work with an old friend on that, and I mean a character that I've done a lot of work on, and no, it wasn't Superman. And right now I am working on a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle book as of yesterday and today. Today I'll be finishing that off. And I'm also working on the second issue of Sword of Ages for IDW, which is a fantastic story and an amazing looking book drawn by Gabriel Rodriguez. And if you've been on the internet and looked at some of the artwork that's out, some of the stuff he's colored, some of the stuff I've colored, but it all looks fantastic because he's done such wonderful drawing, and it's such a great story, and he's really bringing it to life. It makes me think of I don't know, some of the Golden Age greats, classics, but revisited and new again. So that's what I'm working on right now. Well, okay, that's what I'm coloring right now. I'm also writing the first book of Shame, Tales of Shame, Hope. It's the first book in the second trilogy that we're working on, and we're nearly done. I'm just doing the dialogue and catching up to John Bolton, who's doing the painting of it. We're working in a what's called a Marvel style, where I give John a synopsis and a page breakdown, and then he paints from that. And then when the pages are finished, I do the dialogue on them, and then that's rushed off to the letterer, and well, it's happening. So that's a very rewarding project to see something that you own rather than something that you're doing work for hire for other characters, even if it does feed the fanboy in you. Any other questions? Oh, yes, there is. Who are some of your favorite creators in the industry? Do you have a favorite artist to work with? Oh, boy. I've been working with Craig Russell since since I guess 1990. And I guess he would be my favorite, but as a fan of so many different artists in that, and so many people that I've gotten to work with, there's so many people that are just great to work with. That's one of the wonderful things about this job, is I get to collaborate with so many creative people, and it just helps so much to be be part of this thing that's bigger than me, that's got people that I so much admire all around me. So I don't know, I guess the favorite artist I have is the one I'm working on at the time, but there's people that I come back to time and time again, like Paul Pope, and they give me such wonderful work to push myself to develop more of the look that they want me to do, that maybe I might not have done on my own. So I love working with Paul, with Craig, and the projects that they bring to me in that. It was great working with Lee Weeks on that incredible Tom King story about Batman and Elmer Fudd. I mean, I would have never expected that. It was a great project and a wonderful story. Someone just asked, what my was it my dream job to be a colorist? No, no. I actually started in the industry. I thought I was going to be a penciler, and I was working towards that. And I thought maybe I might be a penciler who inked his own work, but I was working mostly on my pencils, trying to bring them up and learning what to draw and that. And as I showed more professionals my work, I was encouraged to develop my inking, because my inking was decent, and that I could have, and as I worked on it more, it was coming up to a professional standard. And when I went to show my work to the editors at DC and Marvel and that, I was showing them my inking, not my penciling, because I knew that my penciling wasn't, well, I didn't feel it was good enough. So I showed them my ink work, and they looked at it and they liked it and that. But at the time, they weren't looking for people, and they saw some of my color work, because I had been hired on as George's color assistant on the Elric books at First Comics. And they saw the color on that, and they said, but we could really use a good colorist. And I got a tryout book, which was a Batman annual that it was a Clayface story that Alan Moore wrote. And after I did that, I got 3 books thrown at me. And after that, I just kept getting so much color work that I wasn't even able to do my more inking samples to develop my skills. And I just, at a certain point, I was getting so much color work that I had to build my own studio and of people who work with me to be my assistants, that I just stopped trying to be an inker and ended up being a colorist. Of course, I thought I was going to be the guy drawing them, and then I was going to be the guy inking them, but what the industry wanted was me to be the guy coloring it. My second career that I'm starting now is doing writing, like the work that I've done on the Victorian or Agents of Law at Dark Horse, or and now finally creator-owned work of mine. So you never know which way life is going to push you along, and what is going to be asked of you. And a hello to Randy Wall, who just signed on. Got any questions? I'd say don't be shy, Randy, but I don't think you are. So go ahead, throw something at me. Questions, please. Oh, what is my favorite art form outside of comics? And what color are my socks today? My socks today are white. They're lovely tube socks a la Walmart, and they're very cozy. And my favorite art form outside of comics would be painting. I love painting, and I love looking at paintings too. I guess one of the painters that meant the most to me in my career is Caravaggio. When I first saw some of his work and saw how flawless it was, and his use of chiaroscuro, and that really lit me on fire. But there's so many amazing painters. It's like I know some people would love to be in a candy shop or a chocolate store, but I would love to be in I love to go and spend time walking around in a gallery, just looking at paintings and and seeing how they made those marks and thinking about what I'd do. I always say that I would love to do more painting in that. Unfortunately, I'm tied to my computer, just doing the work, paying the bills. What project am I working on? Randy's a little late. I'm working on a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle book. It's I said yes to it because the artist that's working on it is the guy I worked on with the G.I. Joe book, and I haven't colored the turtles, and and so the first book that showed up has no turtles in it, even though it's a Mutant Ninja Turtle book. So that was kind of a surprise, but it's great working with Giannis on it. His artwork really, I've developed a style, I think, that from just working on him that seems to serve us both. And I'm not sure if whether I would have done that approach on my own. And Evan wants to know, in addition to Fantastic Four, number 4, what other single comic issues were your favorite as a kid? Oh, God. I think it was Marvel Comics Group Submariner number 8. I loved John Buscema's portrayal of Submariner. And I'm guessing there's some people out there that call him Submariner, but I've always called him Submariner because I thought it was, I don't know, cooler. But there's so many. I mean, when I think back to stuff that I was in love with with a kid, it was like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. And a little bit later, I really got into the Conan stuff. Some of you might pronounce it Conan, but I pronounce it Conan. I've actually heard it pronounced Conan, so each to his own. Another question popped up. Oh, and thanks, Randy. Another question popped up. What comics are you reading right now? Do you have a favorite new series? I'm ashamed to say I am reading no comics right now. I guess, of the favorite series, boy, I don't know. I've gone through some interesting things where at a certain point I stopped. I sold my comic collection and I kept a few things that I just couldn't let go of, but I ended up not buying comics. However, back in those days, when you were working with Marvel or DC and you had done enough work, you would be on their list to receive complimentary copies of all the comics they printed. So for a long time, I was getting a box of would show up once a month, and it would be all the comics that DC had put out that month, and so I would read them all. And with the onset of the digital comics and that, and the way sales are now, I guess, the complimentary comics went away, and so the only comics I get to read now are my complimentary copies of the work that I've done, which, I've already read. So with that in mind, my favorite new series is Sword of Ages, the one I'm working on with Gabriel, because it's an Arthurian myth told in, I guess, in the past, and it's on Mars. And it looks so wonderful. It takes me back to when I was first reading Hal Foster's Prince Valiant. It's the artwork is that good, and I'm doing my best to put colors down on there so that everybody gets the same thrill I did looking at it. How's that? Come on, hit me with another question. Okay. What's the coolest thing you've gotten to do because of being part of the industry? Um, hmm, I don't know. I got a. Do you still have any ties with metal? I guess that means heavy metal. It's made a lot of great changes lately. Um, I do have ties with heavy metal, and I haven't seen one in a couple of months, so I need to do that. And the coolest thing that I've gotten to do because being part of the industry was um, it's a for a single thing. I guess it would be being part of the DC VIP tour of the first Batman movie with Michael Keaton back in the 80s. We were well, I was at a convention in London when the movie was about to be filmed, and DC arranged with the with Pinewood Studios for a little VIP tour of writers and artists who had worked on Batman, and we all jumped into a bus and were taken out to Pinewood Studios, and we walked through all of the movie sets. They were working on the Jack Palance mob boss, his office, and there were 4, I think, Batmobiles that were being built. So we got to climb all over the new Batmobile and sit in it, and then after that we got to walk down Main Street of Gotham, which they had built out in a field in England, and it was a few blocks long, and it was about a story and a half high, and all the rest they put in with CGI in that. But I got to walk through that movie, and that was very, very cool. And we were not allowed to take our cameras on there, so I don't have any pictures to prove it. Yes, it was. I don't know what they do. I guess what they did was they confiscated some people's our cameras and that, so we weren't allowed to. Do you have any crazy industry stories that you can share? Well, there was one person on that tour who snuck his camera in, and he has pictures to prove that he was there. And selfies weren't a thing back then, so I don't have any pictures. I'm not in any pictures with him, or I don't know. Maybe I might be one of the guys walking ahead of him on the street. But John Byrne had a camera there, and he was taking some pictures, and nobody was really that concerned about it, because what they were worried about was people taking photographs and and selling them to the press. Whereas John was just, they were his personal pictures for himself. I'm guessing maybe some of that stuff surfaced. And I know that when we came out of there, we had access to some promotional pictures in that, which Randy might have seen. But they weren't pictures that I took being on the set. They were ones that were supplied to us. And then there was the time that I met Jack Kirby, and he put me in a headlock after he punched me in the stomach. There was that. Speaking of films, which films are your all-time favorites? Top 5 or so. Only 5? I have so many favorites. My family, I come from sort of a movie background with my family, in that the Kindzierski family owned a theater out in the little town that we were living in. And so on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, it was movie night in Arborg. And I got to go and see stuff like that. See films there, sorry. I'm reading and trying to talk at the same time. Uh, I think that I really like Metropolis. I never get tired of watching that. And up the top of my head, it's just going to be a mishmash. If I actually sat down and thought about it, um, I really like Blade Runner. The movies that I really like, I've seen more than once, and I loved some of the horror films like The Innocents and oh man, so much stuff. And I like things like the original Highlander movie with that great Queen soundtrack. Um, boy, um, and I like so many of Hitchcock's pieces. Uh, I just rewatched Rear Window recently. Still works. It's not like some of the. It's like when you get into the sci-fi stuff, you look at like rewatching the original Star Trek. It's still enjoyable, but you're looking at how wrong they were about how the future was in that. Um, and somebody said that Jack was a sweetheart. When Jack punched me, it was affectionately, and he was. We were talking about Jack was very interested in martial arts and boxing and that, and we were talking about that, and he was just kind of play fighting with me, and gave me a couple of punches and got my head around, and it was. I was very, very happy to be sharing time with one of the gods of comic books, and he was very kind, and his wife was there who had actually worked with him on some of this stuff. In case anybody didn't know that, Roz had actually helped Jack with some of his inking. Specifically, I think on the Challengers stuff. Probably other things too, but that one I know for sure. Somebody asked if Drawn and Plastered is still in Winnipeg. It moved with Holly to Montreal, but I think there are some events that are in the works for Winnipeg. Oh, Blade Runner was on last night. I was out running around Winnipeg because of Nuit Blanche, running from different galleries and that through the Exchange District, so I didn't see that. And I'm very excited to see the new Blade Runner film. That'll be cool. How could it not be? It would have been nice to have a flying car like all of us thought we were going to have I believe when I was a kid in the 60s, I remember seeing articles about the flying cars that people would have in the 2000s. And we're still waiting. There are some flying cars out there, but they're not everywhere. And I know there are hoverboards. So we're kind of there. It's just not everywhere and not easy to get. Oh, what's the best advice you've ever heard given to a promising new creator? Um, uh, really learn the craft, and that can be specifically about anything that you're doing, whether it's doing color or writing or penciling in the industry. Um, you really should have an idea of the history of what's gone before you. And I don't think you have to be an expert in it, but if you know all the major influences in that, you can bring it into your art and you can understand the language of comics And if you're looking at the way American comics have been so strongly influenced by Jack Kirby's storytelling, to the changes that shifted when Neil Adams came along and put his spin on that, and you compare that with the storytelling of European books and that, it just makes you that much stronger a storyteller to know all the different ways that you can come at a story. So I think that's probably the best thing, is to really not just, I went through it too, and other kids that I knew that wanted to be, drawing comics when I grew up, were finding like the pin-up page or that cover image of your favorite character, and learning how to draw that, and drawing really cool muscles and all that. Wasn't really understanding anatomy enough to sit down and draw a convincing 10-year-old, or in a lot of cases a convincing 20-year-old woman. Like, you could draw muscles all over on everybody, and because you were drawing, say, Deadpool all the time, maybe you couldn't draw a convincing face or expression. So you need to learn that. And I think from what I learned from Scott McCloud, I think there's like 5 or 6 basic expressions, and if you get those down, then you can tell just about any other story, but you've got to work on where they are. I remember one of the first tryouts that I did was for Marvel, and one of the things you had to draw was not Spider-Man, but Peter Parker sitting in his living room worrying about what he had to do before he puts on the suit and actually goes out and does Spider-Man cool stuff. And then even just to do the Spider-Man cool stuff, you've got to have your perspective and architecture down on that. And you really need to put that together, because if you draw a cityscape that you don't believe in, how do you expect anybody else to believe in it? And you don't want to do things like that kick or sort of kick the reader out of the story, so that they're, the spell between the story and them is broken. And I think that if you work on your craft, no matter what it is, you want to keep that spell up and keep your readers entranced. Another question was, how has the city you lived in influenced your work and path through the world of comics? Wow. Oh, and did your parents bug you about getting a real job, and how did that influence you? My father very much encouraged me to be an artist. He was very happy with what I was doing. My mother really didn't care as long as I didn't bother her or set the house on fire. So I pretty much got to do what I wanted, and my father really helped me collect comic books. When I was young, he would get comics from the local drugstore or pharmacy, where they were in the spinner rack, and at the end of the month, the comics that didn't sell would have the covers torn off of them, and all the covers would be sent back to the distributor, so that the store would get some money back on their purchase of the comics, because they didn't sell. And traditionally, those comics were just thrown in the garbage. But my father knew the guy well enough so that when he was tossing the comics out, the guy would give my father the comics to go through, and he'd pick out a bunch of comics and bring them home. And so I got really hooked on comics by my dad just feeding me a box of them every weekend. So Saturday was like Christmas. And as for the city, how the city influenced me, I think it has greatly influenced my writing, and it's influenced my color in the opportunities that and art that I've had in the city of Winnipeg. I know that I would never had those opportunities if I had stayed out in the country. Yeah, I mean, I went to art school here, had my first jobs as an illustrator and graphic designer here, and just dealing with feeding the graphic market in Winnipeg taught me a lot of stuff, and the looking at the city. Again, I grew up in a place, a small town that was 800 people, and the tallest building was, 2 stories, 2.5. And coming into the city and seeing the city real, I don't know, just brought me a step closer to Peter Parker. Let's see. Uh-oh, somebody's throwing me a big question. What's the most important big idea that you've learned in life, in or out of comics, and why is it important? Never volunteer. You can get into so much trouble. But, boy, most important big idea I've learned in life. Wow. Well, you should never volunteer is a good general rule of thumb, and I think it's what you measure whatever situations come up, so that if like I've volunteered on a lot of things, but I thought that if nothing came of it, it was still a worthwhile thing to do, and I had the time to do it. So I have worked on books like Love is Love, and it's because I really wanted to be part of a project that had touched me. The first published writing work of mine was from a book that I worked on, which was it was an AIDS benefit book. And I was lucky enough to have Tim Sale draw it, and it's just his work on that is just so great. It's a story I like to flip through and just look at regularly. So what I guess what you've got to do, since that never volunteers doesn't sound like such a hard and fast rule with me, I guess you have to follow your passion, like Joseph Campbell said. So you know what's going to make you feel good, and you should really pursue it. And if that means that you love construction work, then bloody well go and do that. But if you don't, and you want to be an artist, and you know that going to law school would be the death of you, then go after your art, because ultimately your parents, as close as you may be to them in that, don't have to live your life. Great to see you too, Randy, even if it is digitally. Nice hat. Good to see Chris too. Nice to see some of the people coming on, say hello and be part of this. Well, there's a few minutes left, so I wanted to do a little plug for a book I'm writing called Necromantic. It's a series from Renegade, and it'll be coming out next year, and it's drawn by David Ross and Jeff Isherwood, and it's an amazing story that I've worked very hard on, and it's going to be colored incredibly well, because yes, I've seen pages, by Chris Chuckery, and I hope everybody's going to love it, and it'll be, as with everything these days, available digitally and print. And it's something very different from me. It's from the people who have followed Shame. Don't expect more of a fantasy, and the people who have read my graphic novel Underworld. It's not like that. It's an action adventure thing with a strong female lead. She's the spy. Her boyfriend's a spec ops or speed operator or whatever you want to call them. Kind of military guy, and it goes in a different direction. It's James Bond meets World War Z. And I'm really happy I had this little opportunity, and it was nice to see everybody coming out and throwing some questions at me, and touching base with some people I haven't talked to in a little while. Maybe we'll have to see if we can't talk to each other in person. And anyone who wants to ask questions when this is over, the video will stay up to rewatch, and I will definitely be checking in to answer any questions that are posted on the site. And I think we have 3 minutes left, so I can't tap dance for you. So I'm not quite sure what to say. If there's anyone still there and you got a quick question, I think I have 3 whole minutes left, or 2. Oh, boy, I don't know where I would advise people to follow me online except to hunt me down on Facebook, and you can always post questions to Drawn and Plastered. I'm the real Lovern Kindzierski is a page on Facebook. You can go there. I'm trying to shift over my thousands of viewers from the Lovern Kindzierski page to more of a professional page, and I'll probably be closing off my other page to just be, friends and family. But of course, that takes me getting in gear and setting that up. But you can look for me there, and watch for me on the Twitterverse and the IDW or Renegade or DC sites talking about work that I'm doing. Everybody can keep an eye out for the House of Horror from DC Comics with the amazing Mike Kaluta cover of the Justice League like you've never seen them before. And I guess I'll see you in the funny pages.